In case you missed last week's announcement, you can now support Heavy Hands on Patreon.
If you don't know what Patreon is, it's basically ongoing crowdfunding. Essentially, it's a platform that will allow you, our listeners, to patronize our show in exchange for rewards.
Currently, we have rewards set for monthly pledges of $1, $3, $5, and $20.
You can get your name read on the show or posted on the Heavy Hands website, and you can even get a guaranteed spot in the Heavy Bag, our listener mail segment.
If you'd like to donate more than that per month, we're open to discussing other rewards, including custom scouting work and fight analysis.
We've enjoyed bringing you all the finer points of face punching for the last year, and we look forward to doing so for a long time yet.
Please help us cover our production costs and keep the show running smoothly each and every week. Check out Heavy Hands on Patreon.com. I'm Connor Rebush, and if you are interested in the finer points of face punching, you've come to the right place. This is Heavy Hands. Hello and welcome to another episode of Heavy Hands. I am your host, as always, Connor Rebush, joined, as always, by Patrick Wyman, who is in Albuquerque, New Mexico this week. Are you enjoying the desert weather, Pat?
I am enjoying Albuquerque. It is, we're real high up here, Connor. We're real high up. Whenever you watch an MMA fight with somebody from with somebody who trains out of Jackson's gym, like, you understand why their cardio is good. I did 2 miles on the treadmill yesterday, and I thought I was going to die.
I sat for 3 hours in a chair today. So, way to make me feel bad, Pat.
You're welcome. I'm more than happy to continue making you feel bad. I went on a hike, too. Got all the way up to about 6,500 feet.
I would have loved to have gone on a hike, you vacationing bastard. It's Thanksgiving week. Welcome to the show. Once again, we've got some so-so shows from last weekend and next weekend, a couple standout fights on each in terms of MMA. Boxing is really dominating this part of November because we had Canelo, Cotto last weekend. Next weekend, World Heavyweight, basically every championship belt out there, including the lineal title being contested between defending champion Vladimir Klitschko and braggadocious challenger Tyson Fury, who I just love in every way. So we'll be talking about that later in the show, but first we're going to address the more recent MMA concerns. Last weekend, we had Neil Magny and Kelvin Gastelum match up in a main event. Neil Magny has always struck me, Pat, as one of those fighters, a Michael Bisping kind of fighter, who just needed the chance to get a 5-round fight because he's such a good stamina-driven fighter. But crazily enough, the 4th and 5th rounds ended up being the worst rounds of the fight for him. Why do you think that was?
Well, so I think that first and foremost, it's important for us to get this out of the way. There's a lot of confusion about what kind of fighter Neil Magny actually is and what he's actually good at. So I saw a lot of people in the lead up to this fight and on Twitter talking a lot about Neil Magny as a striker because he's so long and he's so rangy that, well, you know, he knows how to throw a jab and he's got a long right hand. But there are a lot of holes in Neil Magny's striking game, and there aren't a whole lot of areas in which he actually feels comfortable on the feet.
Yeah.
He feels comfortable doing pretty much one thing as a striker, and that's moving forward and pushing you back towards the fence as he kind of blitzes you with a combination. Like, he's not real comfortable circling. He's not real comfortable working behind a long jab. The jab is there, but the jab is not really a particularly strategically usul tool for him.
No, I don't think he has a great jab, actually. You know, he sure looks like an outfighter. Mm-hmm. He's gigantically tall. He's very, very rangy and long in limb, but he doesn't seem to know how to break an opponent's rhythm with this jab. And worst of all, he doesn't really have the footwork to keep an opponent consistently at range. We've talked about this several times in the past few weeks relating to Stefan Struve and others, but he doesn't seem to know how to interrupt an opponent's onslaught and then use that moment of interruption to employ a little lateral footwork. He gets backed into the fence really easily and very regularly.
Well, he has no idea how to counterpunch at all. That to me, that was the biggest thing that stood out to me, is he just has no idea how to do that. That's not something that's in his skill set. So there is no reason to be afraid of pressuring him because you don't need to worry about him sitting down on a combination as you come in. It's just not something that you have to worry about. And so he is a long fighter who's dangerous when he's moving forward. And the only thing that you really have to worry about as you come in on him is diving into the clinch. And that actually is something you need to worry about. He is good. A real good clinch fighter.
I did not really realize until watching him whip Kelvin Gastelum down to the canvas time and again how tactically effective he is in the clinch. Really nice job of ducking under Gastelum's arms and getting to a strong angle. It tends to also not be an angle where MMA fighters are particularly worried about being taken down. They seem to start fighting hands and just worrying about breaking the grip. Like, not a lot of fighters specialize in takedowns from a rear body lock.
Yeah, it's a rare kind of a skill set to have, but he uses his leverage so effectively.
Yes. Because he's so tall, he barely needs to extend his knees, and your feet are already off the ground like a child being picked up by his father.
Yeah, that is really his best skill set. He doesn't actually have very good shot takedowns. He's not a shot takedown kind of fighter. But that's what I mean when I say, like, I think that there are a lot of misapprehensions about what Neil Magny is actually good at. I mean, he's great in the clinch. He's great from top position. He's great at getting to he's great in scrambles and at getting to your back in those spaces. Everything else is a serious work in progress, as you would expect, because he doesn't actually have that much experience. And he's clearly not like a phenom type of guy where everything comes easily to him.
He's a workhorse.
He's a workhorse, absolutely.
Yeah, his ground game really shocked me against Gastelum, especially after having seen him dominated so thoroughly against Damian Maia. Magny always struck me as a kind of guy who, because he did start out as kind of a sprawl and brawl fighter, where he would try to stay on his feet and use his length, not necessarily consistently, as we saw when he got beaten by, who beat him? James Vick?
No, he got guillotined by Seth Baczynski. He lost to he got. Think about that for a second. We're talking about a guy who got submitted by Seth Baczynski.
Oh, actually, it was a decision to Seth Baczynski. It says.
Was it a decision?
He was submitted by Sergio Moraes.
Oh, okay. Well,
that's
which isn't
totally
so
acceptable. Isn't so bad.
Yeah. Okay. So he got decision by Seth Baczynski, which is a thing that can happen to you. But
still doesn't happen that often. Yeah. Still.
So, but the only two guys that he's lost to on the ground are two of the very best jiu-jitsu practitioners in all of MMA. Sergio Moraes doesn't get talked about enough in that regard.
Yeah.
But he is one of the very best, and that was when Magny was real raw.
Yeah.
And since then. And I think, if memory serves correctly, it was kind of his willingness to grapple with Sergio Moraes that got him in trouble in that.
Yes, and that's really what I think I've thought of Magny as for some time, as a fighter who needed it to be on the feet, though he wasn't always comfortable there, but who was so committed to being well-rounded that he would choose to grapple with opponents against whom he really would have been better off striking with. And maybe that's still the case. He was very willing to grapple with Damian Maia. But
well, I mean, he did his best to stuff those takedowns, but Damian Maia, criminally underrated chain wrestler,
Definitely.
One of the very best chain wrestlers in MMA. Like Magny, and this struck me when he was fighting Gastelum as well. Magny is a guy who's good at stuffing your initial shot, but when you start to get into your chains, when you start to string together takedowns and switch things up, then he kind of struggles to defend, and that's true for a lot of guys in MMA.
Is that kind of a problem for tall fighters, do you think? Magny, Struve, Gustafsson, we've seen all of these guys who have remarkably good initial takedown defense struggle when they get locked into a prolonged wrestling battle with someone. I wonder why that might be.
I think that Gustafsson less so than those other guys, but I think there may be something to that.
Yeah. Less so now, but it was definitely his problem with Davis. It was a problem initially with Cormier. Cormier worked to a position that Gustafsson wasn't comfortable with when he got that big high crotch slam.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I think that could be the case.
Yeah, I wonder. So basically, that's not much analysis. But what we really wanted to talk about before moving on is that Magny is an outfighter. Based on the paradigm that we've drawn up in past episodes, meaning a fighter who wants to be on the high ground at all opportunities, who is not comfortable exchanging, who doesn't want to be in a situation in which there's a high chance of him being hit or him ending up on the wrong end. But range-wise, he's not necessarily the outfighter you might expect him to be, especially given his build. He's really more of a committed infighter, in that when he's put against the fence, which again happens a lot, his first reaction is not to create space and escape, but to latch onto you. We say all the time about outfighters all the way in or all the way out. For Magny, it seems to be about 75 all the way in and about 25 all the way out in terms of what he wants in the cage.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's one of those things with him where I would expect him to get better at the all the way out part. Sure. As time goes on, that I think that's a piece of his game that we'll see him working on.
He's 28, only 5 years into his career.
Yeah, like he has a lot of room yet to get better, and I think we'll continue to see him do that. But like, despite the fact that he won this fight, I know you and I disagree on this, Connor. I scored it 48-47 for Gastelum. I think I was one of the very few who did. And you scored it for Magny.
I felt like Magny won the first two. I'd have to watch it more carefully before I could like concretely disagree with you about that.
I'm one of the very few who thought that Gastelum won the third round, but I just thought he landed the cleaner and harder shots throughout that round. But I thought that we got a real strong sense in the fourth and the fifth round for what Magny's limitations are on the feet, because the moment because like all outfighters, or infighters who want to be all the way out or all the way in, Magny is allergic to the pocket, and as soon as Gastelum figured out that he could just stand his ground and throw when Magny came in on him, then suddenly the whole dynamic of the fight changed.
Why do you think it took Gastelum so long to figure that out? He looked, especially having started training with Rafael Cordeiro for this fight, he looked remarkably timid in the early going.
I think that he was real confused by Magny's range, and I think that that's a thing that happens to a lot of guys when you're fighting when you're fighting somebody who's much, much taller than you, especially if it's an open guard matchup. Where you have that additional few inches of space. I mean, in addition to the height and reach disparity, I think it took him a while to figure out where Magny's hands were, and I think it took him a while to realize that if he just threw back at Magny had nothing to offer him.
I think we did also learn a few things about Gastelum's limitations in the same way.
Oh, no doubt, yeah.
We saw how much Gastelum really struggles to link offense and defense together. How much he struggles to go on the defensive and then counter. He's really more comfortable when he can string together offense. And we've known for some time he's a very natural combination striker. He's a great pressure fighter, maybe a little more strictly than we realized, which actually really makes me want to see Gastelum Brown, because I would love to see a contest of two guys who would much rather be going forward and just see how that plays out. But I think we maybe learned a few things about his limitations in that regard, just as we learned a few things about where Magny actually sits on the stylistic spectrum. It was a good fight, though.
It was. One of the things that I do not think that we saw the best version of Gastelum in this fight. I don't know what's going on, and maybe he's just started working with Cordeiro, maybe that played into it.
It could be an adjustment
he's still
period.
Getting used to that. Yeah. I mean, that like in the past, when guys have tried to run back at Gastelum as he pressures them, he has not had a problem just planting his feet and throwing. But that seemed to be something he really struggled with for the first 13 minutes of this fight. It was towards the end of the third round when he figured out that he didn't need to be afraid of Magny's blitzes.
Sure.
And that the only way he was going to get hurt there was when he continued to run himself backward.
When you're much shorter and much, at a huge reach disadvantage compared to your opponent, it is difficult to get that into your head, though. I can tell you how freaky it can be to be stuck on the end of a fighter's reach and feel like you can do nothing but step forward and get hit by a jab. And it takes a little while to realize these jabs aren't actually killing me. I can afford to take one to get the job done. And I agree with you. I think that was probably an adjustment period, maybe with coaches, an adjustment period with a change of opponents, one that certainly favored Magny, the short notice king, over Gastelum, and an adjustment period with just the range of Magny, who as we said, not an immensely effective outfighter, and that's why Gastelum was able to take advantage of him in the last few rounds, but still a long guy who can hit you a lot further away than you can hit him, and that's just a hurdle to struggle with.
Yeah, I mean, and another piece of that is we're looking at Gastelum as a young and growing fighter. He just turned 24 last month.
Yeah.
And he's been fighting as a professional for less than 5 years. Like, he is also really, really raw. Yeah. And there are still things in his game that he's learning. This was his 13th professional fight.
Absolutely. And he's been so phenomenal and so obviously talented. Maybe too many expectations early in his career. I hope he hangs with Cordeiro. I think it will be a really good match for him.
Yeah,
I hope
over the long run, it's going to take him a little while.
Sure, but that happens, and I think you don't want to expect that it's going to be a magical turnaround the moment that you switch to a new trainer. So, based on the topic of switching from defense to offense, though, which I just mentioned regarding Gastelum, that was something that both you and I noticed with Canelo Alvarez, who fought Miguel Cotto last weekend in what was a much better fight than really anything the UFC card had to offer. There were a few highlights on the UFC card, but really Canelo Cotto was a fantastic, closely matched fight, and I think it was probably the best we've seen from Canelo Alvarez, who, like Gastelum, is he 24 years old?
Canelo, I think Canelo is 25.
25. So 1 year older. He has been fighting since he's 15, however, so he has 10 years of professional boxing experience, and he just looked phenomenal against a very experienced, kind of a rejuvenated version of Cotto, who I didn't think looked bad. I thought Cotto looked like he was very well prepared for the fight. He looked as good as he's looked in his recent matchups. I think he was just against the most difficult person he's fought probably since fighting Manny Pacquiao.
Yeah, it was a tough matchup for Cotto. And Cotto, like, I agree with you when you say that he came in and he looked and Cotto looked good. He really did. I thought that Cotto's combination work was solid. His triggers were really nice. His jab looked great. It's about the best Cotto's jab has looked in a really long time. And strategically, he had good ideas about what he wanted to do at various points in the fight. Like he was ready to switch things up on a dime from early sticking and moving, circling, trying to get Canelo to chase, to then moving towards a more aggressive kind of game plan. And I think it was round 5.
Freddie Roach seemed to put a lot of importance on that change, on boxing with Canelo to confuse him in the beginning and then pushing him backwards in the middle rounds of the fight to break his confidence.
Yeah, and I thought that Cotto was very well prepared to do that. He just kind of got outgunned and eventually outpunched.
Yeah, absolutely.
It seemed to me that just the sheer force of Canelo's shots wore Cotto down and took their toll.
It's interesting you say that, actually. Why don't we take a quick break, and when we come back, I'd love to get back into this, because a lot of people have talked about the size and the power differential, and I may have an interesting perspective on that. So, quick break. We'll be right back to discuss Canelo versus Cotto. Okay, wait, stop. Don't skip this break. I know you skip most of them. It's a podcast. It's not a radio show. You don't have to listen to the commercials. But if you follow my very simple instructions, you'll be doing a huge service to Heavy Hands, Pat, and myself. First, go to Stitcher.com or iTunes.com. You can use either of those services to subscribe to the show, which makes it really, really easy to listen to every episode and not have to go hunting for it on our confusing, badly designed website. Once you're there, give us a positive rating and a positive review. That means go to the little 5-star thing and click on the star all the way to the right. That's a 5-star rating. That's the best one you could possibly give us. And like 20 or 30 words about how you enjoy the show. It may not seem like much, but it's a huge help to us, and we really appreciate it. It helps us bring Heavy Hands to an ever-increasing audience, which is just good for everybody. So thank you for listening. Please take the time to give us a positive rating and review. Next time that you're on at your computer, at your phone, whatever, iTunes.com, Stitcher.com, search for Heavy Hands, give a positive rating and a review. Thank you. And now, back to the show. And we are back. Pat, before the break, you mentioned Canelo's power. What I've heard from a lot of people is that his size was too much for Cotto. I'm not sure I completely agree with this. I don't think this was like a fight where power and size were really the deciding factors. It wasn't a fight in which Canelo was muscling Cotto around. He wasn't getting in his face. He wasn't pressuring him too much. I think the impression that a lot of people have is that Canelo was too big because he could not be moved by Cotto's punches, which is what the commentators were saying over and over. I've seen it lots and lots of times online since the fight. I tend to think that the reason Cotto couldn't, for example, we mentioned before the break, I know I'm getting all over the place with this, but we mentioned how Freddie Roach seemed to think it was important to push Canelo back, which is a great idea. He's better standing his ground or moving strategically or coming forward. He's not a great, pure counterpuncher. But he was obviously not able to be pushed back. In fact, Cotto kind of failed spectacularly. I really expected him to drive Canelo backwards a few times in this fight using that great jab of his, and he couldn't. But I don't think size was the deciding factor. I think it was defense. I think that Canelo has some of the best upper body movement in boxing right now. I think he has fantastic head movement. He uses lots of different angles. He incorporates it with pivots. He's one of the best pivoters in in boxing right now. Not in terms of necessarily ring cutting or anything, but just in how he knows how to incorporate his upper body with his feet, move them in concert to avoid attacks. I think it allows him to avoid taking the full brunt of punches that do land and avoid other punches connecting at all without having to retreat or give ground. And I think that makes him very difficult to back off.
Yeah, let me defend my point on power here. I don't mean in the sense that like Canelo just hit him harder and that's what swayed observers. I mean in the sense that as the fight wore on, specifically Canelo's power in working to the body was what that you notice after every time Canelo lands a body shot, the gap between then and when Cotto does something gets longer and longer and longer and longer as the fight wore on. That by the eighth or the ninth round, when Canelo lands a body shot, we're talking a full 5, 10, 15 seconds before Cotto can get himself back into the fight to start working again.
Sure.
And in those spaces, Canelo's size, I don't mean in the sense that he outweighed Cotto by 10 or 15 pounds, but his length. That his length and his ability to land looping shots that cut off Cotto's movement as he tried to move out, those shots to the body that we've talked about a lot on this show for fighters who want to pressure. You got to use strikes that come in laterally to cut off that space. And Canelo is really, really, really good at that. And that's where his size came in, and that's where his power came in, is with body shots far more than landing to Cotto's head. Though he did land to his head, but yeah. I think it was the body shots and what those did in terms of taking away Cotto's ability to work consistently that did that. And his defense was absolutely a factor. I thought that I have never been more impressed by Canelo's defense than I was in this fight at the inability of Cotto to put clean left hooks on him.
Yeah.
That was pretty shocking to me.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you think it maybe has more to do with precision than power, though? Canelo strikes me. I don't think Canelo is a tremendously strong puncher. I don't think he, especially as he's gone up in weight, I don't think he can put away anything resembling an adequately durable fighter with single shots. I think he's an attritive fighter in that he throws good combinations and he attacks very precisely. He seems not only to hurt Cotto, but to hurt him with shots that he didn't seem to be throwing that much into. He seemed to adjust his uppercuts very well to connect with Cotto no matter what the range was. He seemed to have a really good understanding of range and placement, and I think maybe I'm just trying to go with a narrative, but it seemed to me like that was a bigger factor necessarily than just hitting hard.
Yeah, I mean, I disagree with you to an extent. I do think that he is an above-average puncher. I think that he does have the way that guys visibly move a lot of the time when he hits them. And I think that unless you're hitting harder than the normal fighter, then that's not going to be a thing. I do agree with you that he's more attritive than anything, but I think that speaks to the durability of guys that he's fighting at this level far more than him not being a terribly hard puncher.
Sure.
Every time you've put somebody in front of him who can be knocked out, Canelo has gotten to him, so Erislandy Lara is a tremendously tough dude and doesn't get hit very much. And Canelo couldn't really get to him. Cotto, how many times has Cotto been knocked out in his career?
He was knocked out by Manny Pacquiao, and then was an attritive knockout, and he was stopped by the allegedly or supposedly loaded gloves of Antonio Margarito. So not often.
Yeah, I mean, Cotto over the course of his career has been a durable fighter, and I think you could see that with the way that Canelo approached him, that his willingness and ability to work the body spoke to that same thing. Mm-hmm. But then again, do you think it's possible? Let me just bounce this off you, Connor. You think it's possible for a guy to be a really hard body puncher and not a tremendously hard headhunter?
I don't know. And actually, this is kind of an interesting topic to me. We talked about liver shots not long ago on the show. Was that last week?
That was last week, yeah.
We answered a heavy bag question, I think, from Shane Walsh about liver shots. And I was talking to a friend of mine who trains out in Vegas as a boxer, and he was talking about body shots as well. In his experience, he felt like precision placement, and timing were far more important than power. And when it comes to body shots, because I don't know, in your experience, I don't know what it's like, but I have sometimes found myself being hit by really hard body shots, but ones that I had the advantage of seeing coming, and that weren't necessarily to a particular vulnerable target, like the solar plexus or the liver, and been surprised at how well I absorbed them.
Mm-hmm.
I've been hit by a hard right hand to the stomach, and seen it coming, and so just exhaled and tensed a little bit as it came in. Nothing. I'm certainly no paragon of abs, but I was surprised at myself at how well I could take that punch. That it didn't really feel it in the midst of the sparring. But I've also been hit with light left hooks to the liver and been badly hurt and had to take a knee. So I think maybe this has to do with Canelo as just an accurate puncher. I think he chooses his body shots really well. I think a lot of people known for their body punching are known for throwing volume to the body and just attacking relentlessly and breaking fighters down. It's notable that we both agree that Alvarez seems like an attritive fighter when he doesn't throw very much volume. I think his style as a fighter is really to prefer picking his shots, which is why he's more of a boxer than a puncher at certain ranges. And we can get into that more in a bit, because it has always annoyed me how people called for him to brawl crazily with Floyd Mayweather in their fight. But what do you think about that? Precision over power to the body, and maybe that's why Canelo seems like such a powerful body puncher.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there is a craft to being a hard body puncher far more than just throwing really hard at the body.
Sure.
If you just throw really hard at the body, you're probably going to hit off somebody's elbows far more than you're likely to land it cleanly. Canelo does a great job of setting up his body shots, mixing up his rhythm, mixing up the angle that he throws them at. That's something that has always stood out to me. That Canelo will sometimes throw like a straight like a horizontal left hook at the body, but a lot of the time what he throws is more of a shovel hook, depending on the angle, depending on how he's going to move it around your elbow, around your defense, and into you as you move. Like you and I both saw this in the seventh round, that Canelo actually hurt Cotto with a counter left hook to the body. Mm-hmm. It was just a sneaky little shot, but he caught Cotto as he circled into it. As Cotto was trying to exit, Canelo placed it directly on his liver. Cotto drops his right hand and does nothing for about 15 or 20 seconds.
And I think those are probably his best punches, those uppercuts or shovel hooks, those upward short punches. Whether to the head or the body, Canelo throws those very well. And he throws them well long, too. A lot of people believe that you can't throw an uppercut long, that it's only a short-range punch, just because there are risks in throwing it long. I think he does it very well. I think he times it very well and uses that angle to his great benefit. I think another example of somebody who fits this classification might be Ricky Hatton. Mm-hmm. Ricky Hatton was not a tremendous puncher the way we normally think of them. He certainly has a lot of knockouts, but a very attritive fighter, a swarmer. But all of his biggest one-punch knockout moments, aside from the ones on which he was the receiving end, like the Manny Pacquiao fight or the Floyd Mayweather fight, ones that he was delivering, most of them were body shots. And I think Hatton was a very intelligent body puncher in how he timed and placed his punches.
Yeah, I'm with that. I think that's probably true. There is a craft to throwing body punches. Definitely. that is not a really common thing. Yeah.
So here's why perhaps I'm so hung up on the narrative of Canelo as precision puncher rather than power puncher. I think because he has a great deal of knockouts, and we've seen some really spectacular combination punching. And I guess because he's a Mexican fighter, there's this strange idea that all Mexican fighters have to be sluggers, even though most of the very best Mexican fighters in history have not been like that. Salvador Sanchez, Vicente Saldivar, these guys are not, they're not sluggers. Point aside, there are many great boxers from Mexico, and Canelo Alvarez is one of them. He has always been a boxer-puncher, and he has always had good killer instinct when he has an opponent really hurt, but he has never been a wildly aggressive fighter. And so this fight, I thought, was a perfect example of how good he is at doing that and how good he continues to become at doing that. Can we look back at the Floyd Mayweather fight quickly and talk about people's reaction to that? I don't know if you were keyed into the boxing community at the time that was going on, Pat. Do you have?
Not, and I still try to avoid it as much as possible.
Sure. Do you have any recollections of people's reactions to that fight?
I mean, I think from you and I talking about it since then that people wanted Canelo to go in there and try and slug with Floyd.
They wanted Canelo to do what Jose Luis Castillo did. They wanted him to do what Maidana did. They wanted him to go nuts, and were shocked when he didn't. Not that they just wanted him to, they expected him to. And I think it's very important to draw this separation between someone who can punch and someone who is a pressure fighter or brawler or swarmer. That they're very different. And we can talk about that more when we get into Vladimir Klitschko towards the end of the episode, who's tremendously heavy-handed and even more of a pure boxer than Saul Alvarez. The thing is that Alvarez boxed Floyd Mayweather because that's how he was always going to fight Floyd Mayweather. People said it was like some kind of tragic mistake, like, you can't possibly box with Mayweather, disregarding the fact that Miguel Cotto's best successes were when he decided to box with Mayweather, and that Mayweather has been successfully boxed with in the past. And we've talked about this before. You can't just cede an entire range or style of fighting to your opponent and expect to win, because then they know what their avenue to victory is. So I don't know. I don't understand this idea that Canelo, because he is a big guy, because he's powerful, because he has fast hands, that he should be this type of fighter that does not really suit him. I think it kind of speaks to a lack of understanding on a lot of fans' parts of the mental side of fighting. That you can't just choose to adopt another style. You know, there's not a style of the day kind of thing as a fighter. You have to learn to fight for what best suits you mentally, not just your long arms or your heavy hands or what have you, but how are you going to be most effective fighting most of the time?
Yeah. I mean, I do still think Canelo has a little more, has good pop.
Sure. I agree with you. I agree with you there.
It's definitely, like, if you watch Canelo fight, it's clear what he's most comfortable doing, you know, like, and that's, he's gonna kind of gently stalk you around, but he's not really gonna try and pressure you. He'll work behind a jab a little bit. But then he does it, but then, you know, he's got his triggers. He's got the shots that he really wants to throw at you. And then when he sees what he wants, then he's going to throw. But it's going to be relatively limited volume. It's going to be, 12 to 15 punches per minute, 35 to 45 punches around. And very, very rarely is he going to exceed that. Mm-hmm. Like, that he's a measured, calm, clear-headed fighter who picks and chooses his spots and picks and chooses his shots very carefully.
Yeah.
And that's who he is. He's not a wild man. He's not a thunderous puncher. Like, that's his game. He's a cool, collected fighter who's getting better with age too. Like, that's I think a big part of it.
Yeah, absolutely. With age, he's 25 years old. He has tons and tons of room to improve. He's getting better at going from that defense to that offense, which I think I get the impression that he and his trainers study Floyd Mayweather. Mm-hmm. I really do. A lot of the tricks that they've pulled, Lee Wiley was mentioning this on Twitter recently. I mentioned it a while back when I talked about, I had an article I think called Canelo Alvarez's hybrid style or something corny like that. And I was talking about how he would measure with his lead hand and use what I've since decided to call sticky punching to keep an opponent on the end of his left hand so he can line him up for the right. He's adopted a lot of pull counters. He's used his shoulders very well defensively. I think he learned a couple tricks when Mayweather beat him and started studying him and adding those to his arsenal. I think it just basically all of these ideas added together give you the impression that Canelo Alvarez is a cerebral fighter, an intelligent, measured, slow-paced, smart fighter, not a banger. And he doesn't, it just doesn't suit him. He can bang, but he just doesn't go in there with that as his goal.
Well, and, I think in Canelo's case, too, like, a lot of that narrative around him has to do with the fact that he was so young when he became a well-known fighter, mm-hmm. that it's hard to credit, what was he, like 20, 21 when he was starting to get, like, name fighters as opponents?
Yeah.
Like, yeah, so starting, he beat Kermit Cintrone in 2011, so he would have been 21 at that point. He beat Shane Mosley shortly after turning 22.
His first really big fight was probably the Baldomir fight in 2010. So he was 20 years old.
So he was 19 or 20 when he's getting these matchups. Yeah. And it's really hard for anybody to look at a 19 or a 20-year-old and say he's winning these fights because of his craft.
Yes, pretty much. He's young, he's aggressive, he's a young lion, he can't be this crafty boxer. The same reputation has followed his trainer, which has really upset me over the past years. People have, if you go to any video of Canelo working with his head trainer, Eddie Reynoso, people will complain that he's in this small gym. He needs to go somewhere else and go to some celebrity trainer. I've been very impressed with how Reynoso has brought him along. I think Canelo looks like a very well-trained fighter. You know, he looks very well-schooled. He has some of the most technical offense in boxing. He's got great defense. He has progressively gotten better at melding these two together and becoming just a very cohesive, fluid boxer-puncher. I see no reason to complain about the way that Canelo is being prepared or the way that he's being brought along, and I think it bears remembering, 25 years old, the man has already established himself firmly as one of the very best fighters on the planet. So, I don't know. I enjoyed the fight. I was really impressed with him. One of the toughest opponents of his career. Arguably the second toughest opponent of his career after Mayweather, and I think he passed the test with flying colors. So I'm really looking forward to seeing more from him. We've mentioned him already. We're going to be talking about Vladimir Klitschko next, as well as Tyson Fury, his opponent. We'll take one quick break, and then we'll be back to do that, and then your heavy bag questions. Okay, so here's another way you can help us out. Go to your couch, lift up the cushions, and scrounge around in the creases for change, lint, like bent paper clips, like a thumbtack that you stab your thumb on and then you scream alone in your living room. Throw all the stuff out except the change. All right, now take that and deposit it into your bank account or your PayPal account. Head over to heavyhandspodcast.com and click on the donate button on the right side of your screen. Whatever money you just found, which you weren't using anyway, send it to us, all right? Because Pat and I will use it. That money helps us keep this show on the air and free of charge, which is great for you. It's great for us because that way we're making a little bit of money. The donations are a huge deal for us. So please go to heavyhandspodcast.com. Any spare change that you might have lying around, hit the donate button on the right side of the screen and send it our way to help us keep this show live. Thanks. And now back to Heavy Hands. And we are back for our final segment. I wanted to talk about one of the fights that I've been looking forward to most since it was announced. Feels like it's been years since they announced this fight. Vladimir Klitschko, lineal heavyweight champion, the man at heavyweight in the boxing world, is taking on Tyson Fury, who I think, Pat, you and I both strongly believe will be his toughest challenge in a long time, though he hasn't necessarily been sold as such in the boxing community.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of those things where, like, by virtue of not following boxing at all, like, I am much higher on Tyson Fury than it seems like people who are actually in the space are.
Sure.
Like, I think he's really good, man. It's
really easy to laugh at Tyson Fury and write him off because he's such a goofball and he says stupid things. And his gypsy shit, as you so eloquently put it before the show, he's very into this whole, gypsy Irish traveler lifestyle and so on and so forth. Not disparaging that community, just Tyson Fury's bizarre advocation of it. And yet, Tyson Fury is a fantastically good heavyweight boxer. And he really falls into the theme of outfighting and boxing technically that we've been talking about on this show, because Fury was once he was once not kind of far too willing to engage in a brawl. He's always been a long-limbed fighter, but it seemed like he reacted to being hit by slugging with his opponent, kind of similar to the man he's fighting. And it took Emmanuel Stewart to really break Vladimir Klitschko of those habits of opening himself up and getting reckless when he became hurt or tired. And Tyson Fury has matured to being a much stricter and yet still creative outfighter in a lot less time than it took Klitschko. He's only, I keep talking about people's ages, he's in the Canelo range. He's 25, 26 maybe. He's very young and has been getting better and better with each fight. What do you think of him overall, Pat?
So what really stands out to me in the context of this particular matchup with Vladimir Klitschko is his willingness to just bang on the inside. That, like, he's not going to be pushed around in the clinch in the way that Klitschko has as egregiously in recent fights just dove into the clinch and hung on for dear life. Like, he's like, you can't, I don't think you can do that to Tyson Fury because he doesn't give enough of a fuck.
Yeah.
Like, not to put too fine a point on it, but like, you're not gonna, like, that's not gonna frustrate Tyson Fury. He's just gonna keep hitting you.
Yeah. And not recklessly. The thing is that Tyson Fury, I think a great comparison for Tyson Fury would be a little more mentally collected version of Riddick Bowe. Riddick Bowe was a very dangerous heavyweight in his day. He packed a huge punch, and he was renowned for being a tall, long fighter who liked to infight. And I think Tyson Fury is an excellent example of this because we always hear that a long fighter is supposed to stay on the outside. But the great thing about being tall, I should say the worst thing about being tall, is being stuck on the outside and getting hit. Your head is a sitting duck for somebody who is confident enough to step past your jab. A big right hand over the top, really hard to avoid as the much taller fighter. It really is. We've seen Stefan Struve, we've seen Vladimir Klitschko, we've seen Tyson Fury himself when he fought Steve Cunningham, who wasn't even a very powerful puncher, but he had the advantage of that sneaky lower angle, big overhand right, dropped Fury to the canvas. So that's a disadvantage. The flip side of that is that inside, being tall is a massive advantage. You can always get low to keep yourself from being bullied around, but then at select moments, you can stand up and you have leverage. Just as we were saying about Neil Magny with his clinch takedowns earlier in the show, taller boxers have the advantage of devastating uppercuts. Or in MMA, knees. We saw that with Alexander Gustafsson landing that clinch knee against Daniel Cormier. Being tall allows you to follow through much more effectively on upward strikes. So when Tyson Fury steps in against an opponent shorter than him, or Vladimir Klitschko, who will be about his size, he can drive fully through the opponent's chin while still being in the sort of power arc of the punch. Whereas a shorter fighter against Klitschko would have to punch above his own head to land an uppercut, at which point the punch has already lost most of its steam, and so you can't really drive through effectively.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I think that like the other thing about Fury on the inside is his ability to land hard shots on the breaks.
Yes.
That if it's not broken by the referee, Fury is perfectly capable of creating space, breaking on his own, and then slipping a nice 2, 3, 4 punches into that space.
Yeah, he's not liable to be completely tied up with both arms. He will pummel his hands out of there, get head position, push off, and then land 2, 3 good short punches. And he'll extend those punches as you get pushed away, so you're off balance, your hands may drop, you may be compromised, and that is when Fury is going to be trying to hit you. So he's not only good in close, but good in the transition from close to far away. That's why I think he's such a difficult opponent for Klitschko. As for Klitschko, I always love bringing him up as an example of the boxer or outfighter archetype because, for example, we talked about Canelo Alvarez, little better than average punching power, perhaps significantly better than average punching power, and that may seem to most people what makes him a boxer puncher. And I suppose if you go by a definition other than ours, that may be what makes him a boxer puncher rather than a boxer. As the name implies, a boxer who can punch. But Vladimir Klitschko is absolutely that. He is probably one of the hardest single-punch knockout artists on the planet. He is a devastating puncher, which I think his record speaks to that. He's got a 79% KO ratio against tough heavyweights, many of whom he has gone a long time with basically not trying to knock out because he's such a weird sort of, I don't want to say timid at the risk of insulting him and prompting him to come knock me out, but a very kind of reserved fighter at times. Despite that, one punch is all it's ever taken from Vladimir Klitschko to badly hurt a tough, durable opponent, and yet he is an outfighter to the core. Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. He is conservative to a fault in his fights. That he we've talked before how many times about picking your spots to throw, picking your spots to engage. And Vladimir Klitschko has a very clear idea of what the spaces where he wants to engage actually are. And it's a very, very, very limited array. He's a cerebral fighter, so you know that those spaces exist, but it's a very limited array of them. Otherwise, he's perfectly happy to jab you and circle and stay in the spots that he wants to be in.
Yeah.
Like, unlike Canelo, because Canelo is perfectly happy to engage with you in the pocket under the right set of circumstances, which is it's a much broader array of the right set of circumstances for Canelo to engage you on not his terms.
Yeah, and the thing with Canelo, we talked about how he will bang with an opponent. Canelo, when he does that, you get the sense that it's because he's currently brimming over with confidence, right? When Cotto hits him with a good shot and Canelo gets a smile on his face and starts exchanging combinations with him, and like showing off his defense and being flashy, you watch that and you really get the impression that he is just full of bravado and ego. He really knows how good he's looking in that moment. When Vladimir Klitschko used to exchange with opponents, it was for the exact opposite reason. He never willingly engaged in a brawl. He did it in a desperate last-bid effort to get this guy away from him, and it was often when he was knocked out in the past, and he's been knocked out 3 times. He's only 3 losses, or knockouts, all basically because of circumstances like that. And so really, it's if we look at a style as being where is a fighter most comfortable, or what does he do, what's his top preference in the ring, then Klitschko is about as pure an outfighter as you can get. He wants to completely nullify you inside, and he will wrap you up the moment you cross into that mid-range threshold if he can. Or he wants to keep you on the end of his left hand and wait very, very patiently for what he feels is the perfect opening for a straight right, or his most underrated punch, a beautiful rising left hook.
Yeah, I'm with that. So I think we're both on the same page that we think that Fury can give Klitschko problems in a couple of different ways because he's tall enough to fight with him on the outside, and because he's willing to bang it out in the clinch in a space where Klitschko kind of goes to out of kind of uses as his safety blanket. But yeah, no, I think we both think that Fury has a good shot. Is that right?
I'm going to go ahead and break the Richter scale with a take quake here. I think that Tyson Fury can beat Vladimir Klitschko. In fact, I think he will.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if I'm going to go that far, but I certainly think he has a good chance of doing so. I mean, I don't see why he wouldn't.
Counting him out seems like a foolish endeavor, and a lot of people seem to be counting him out.
Yeah, and that's the part that I don't understand. I haven't done enough, like a full in-depth tape study to say I really think that Fury is going to beat him. Or that I think that Klitschko is going to dominate him, but I don't see why Fury couldn't beat him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I think that about ties up that conversation. We got a couple heavy bag questions, not from our Patreon patrons, Pat. If you guys have donated $5 or more on a monthly basis, please send us in your questions. There's no rush, of course, but you are entitled to having a question guaranteed answered on the show. So please go to patreon.com. Go to your patron manager or whatever your version of this page is called. Send us a message, pledge manager probably. Send us a message with a couple options for questions. Keep it brief if you can, but 2 or 3 options would be great. That way we don't have to write you back and say, we don't think we can do that one. Please send us another one, because we want to address your concerns and questions and whatever you might be curious about in the fight game. We do have some heavy bag questions from Twitter, though, so we will get to those right now. Our first question comes to us from friend of the show. I'm off my game tonight, Pat. Friend of the show? Fiend of the show might be appropriate.
Fiend of the show? Yeah. Do we have fiends? I don't think we have fiends.
Well, Mookie Alexander is about as close as it gets. This is from Fiend of the show, Mookie Alexander. His question relates very concisely to the topic we were just addressing. Does Fury have a chance? What do you think, Pat?
Yes, Fury has a chance. Absolutely. As we just discussed, yes, Tyson Fury absolutely has a chance of winning that fight. He works at a good pace, good volume, throws a lot of punches out there. I can see that being a problem for Klitschko. His willingness to work on the inside, as we talked about, his ability to throw his ability to throw on the brakes, that's a problem. I think that he can absolutely win that fight.
And I like his versatility at range. If you talk about good switch hitters in boxing, you've got Terrence Crawford, and then after that, it's pretty much Tyson Fury. He's actually a very good southpaw orthodox switch hitter, fights very well out of both stances, and I think does a little better job than Terrence Crawford of switching up mid-combination, of hiding his switches in the middle of attacks so he can make sudden unexpected changes of distance and angle. And while that definitely could be a problem against Klitschko, I think he will probably be able to bring out some of that Klitschko timidity and tone his volume down. So I definitely think he has a chance. Our next question comes back to us from Robert Montez, at Robert_Montez on Twitter. He asks, seems like Canelo struggles with veteran counterpunchers. His examples are Mayweather or Erislandy Lara. Do you think Triple G's aggression favors Canelo? And he's, of course, referring to Gennady Golovkin, who Canelo was happy to call out after beating Cotto. What do you think, Pat? Do you think an aggressive opponent like Triple G is more favorable to him than someone like Mayweather or Lara?
No, and I'll tell you why. I think that Canelo would have real trouble with Golovkin's pace. I think that Golovkin is better at dictating the pace of the fight. This was something that emerged very clearly to me from Golovkin's last fight, was how good he is at making sure that you're going to fight at exactly the pace that he wants you to fight at, no matter what you do. That he's been able to dictate the same rate against so many different styles of opponent, using different tools for each one. That even somebody as skilled as Canelo, I'm not sure is going to be able to function at that 25 to 30 punch a minute kind of pace. So I think that there's a good chance in that fight that that Canelo just cannot compete with Golovkin at that pace. I think that in a fight where you're throwing 15 to 20 punches a minute, like so slightly higher than what Canelo is maybe comfortable with, that Canelo would still have a good shot in that. But not if they're fighting at Golovkin's pace. Like the pace to me is the biggest issue in that fight.
Do you think that Canelo is perhaps the best controller of pace that Golovkin has ever faced as well?
Absolutely. But even if you take off even if you take Golovkin from throwing 30 to 35 punches a minute down to, or 25 to 30 punches a minute down to 20, which is probably where Canelo could get him to, that's still a problematic thing for Canelo.
Yeah.
Like, that's still really fast. I don't know if Canelo's gas tank could handle that. I don't know if he could deal with the power that Golovkin has, even as good as he's become defensively. Like, a lot of variables in there, but to me that looks off the top of my head, it looks like it favors Golovkin.
Yeah, I have to agree very very slightly, I think, in Golovkin's favor. It's a really fascinating fight. I think it would probably look similar to the Kirkland fight, though Kirkland is a much more reckless, sort of all or nothing come forward fighter than Golovkin. I think that showed off Canelo's counterpunching ability. Again, I've mentioned several times how skilled he has become at transitioning from defense to offense, back and forth, using the opportunities, aggressive defense, you might call it, using the opportunities created by his defense to capitalize. And I think he could do that to Golovkin. Golovkin is certainly not unhittable, especially coming forward. He can be countered, but he's very difficult to hurt. I don't think Canelo is a big enough puncher to really take him out of his game, but I wonder. I think he took away Cotto's volume more than Cotto expected him to. And I think he's done that to other fighters. And I do think while he's not necessarily a born counter fighter because he's such a jack of all trades, there are certain aspects of his game that give him difficulty, certain limitations to his style and his physical nature that give him difficulty with counterpunchers and outfighters, as Robert pointed out. Like he's not very quick of foot. He tends to attack really linearly, so he gets outmaneuvered when he's trying to cut off the ring.
He really relies heavily on on shots to the body to redirect your movement.
He's got fast hands,
far more so than he does with his feet.
Yes, fast hands and precision punching. That's how he cuts off the ring, in lieu of having great footwork. But I think that Golovkin could be a little bit of an interesting matchup for him there, because you don't need fast feet to maneuver the ring with Golovkin, who is not that fast himself, and if you want to stand toe-to-toe with him, is usually there. Although, you never know how Golovkin would approach that fight, because he really shocked me with how brilliantly he boxed against David Lemieux. So who knows? It's a fascinating fight, obviously. I really hope it happens relatively soon. I'd love to see it. Two of the biggest guys in boxing right now, though if rumors are to be believed, Canelo has certainly more drawing power than Golovkin, who kind of tanked at the box office.
Well, people forget how long it takes to build a viable pay-per-view draw. Very, very, very rare for somebody to be a smashing pay-per-view success in their first headlining bout.
Yeah, and Canelo's been being built for some time by Golden Boy. He was on the Mayweather undercards. He fought Shane Mosley. He got the high-profile fights to build up his brand. This is Golovkin's first effort, and unfortunately, the middleweight division is not really a place in which to build name recognition. There aren't many opponents that people think, oh, he beat so-and-so. Nobody knows. It's not like welterweight, so it is what it is. We have one final question, Pat, a very important one. Julie Kedzie, former UFC and Strikeforce and all over the damn place fighter, at JulesK_fighter on Twitter, asks us, do you think Bailey is cute? She's talking about her dog, Bailey. She's got a picture here. We may have to include this in the show notes. What do you think? Using your MMA expertise, of course, Pat, how would you respond to that?
Yeah, I would say absolutely. I think Bailey is totally adorable. Julie is a wonderful person, a great follow on Twitter, and also the matchmaker for Invicta.
Oh yes, and commentator, right?
Yeah, so it has put together so many awesome fights and found so many good fighters. But yes, Julie, we think that Bailey is adorable, freaking adorbs.
Well, you say we. I'm gonna go ahead and break out the Richter scale again. Comes another take quake.
Oh, are you coming in with a take quake, Connor?
I'm going to say that, yeah, the dog's pretty damn cute. I can't really disagree with that. So thanks for all those questions, everybody, especially you, Julie. Very, very pertinent to the subject of the show. If anyone else has dog pictures they'd like to send in, or cat pictures, I'm more of a cat person myself. I would love to see some pet pictures just mixed into the hashtag heavy bag questions feed right here. Pat, before we wrap up, do you have anything you want to tell the people about at home?
Honestly, pretty light week for me. I got a preview coming this week for the Soul card that features Benson Henderson versus Jorge Masvidal.
Great fight, even though we didn't discuss it.
Yeah, no, that's all I have. I'll have busy next couple of weeks. Though.
That's a great fight. We didn't address it, but that is a fantastic matchup. Henderson Masvidal, I think, is really interesting.
Yeah, it's just one of those cards where I will watch that fight with interest, and I'll watch the Duho Choi versus Sam Sicilia fight with interest. Choi.
Yeah, and they moved that to the main card, making it easier to find.
Yeah, and literally, that card has just been gutted by injuries. I mean,
I'm almost kind of glad. They were going to have Hyun-Gyu Lim fight Dominique Steele. Dominique Steele came into the UFC, got blown out of the water by Zach Cummings, who we all know is a thunderous puncher, and so then the UFC decided, hey, let's put him against the bona fide hardest hitter in the division. I'm really glad, not for Hyun-Gyu Lim's sake, but I'm glad that Lim got injured because we may have seen a life saved over the last week.
Yeah, no kidding. My God. I mean, well, the Takanori Sato knockout is still top 5. Just you knew that was going to happen. You knew exactly how that was going to happen, how that was going to go down, and then it went down exactly that way. And you knew Hyun-Gyu Lim was going to knee Dominique Steele in the face repeatedly. And that was that. There was no other possible outcome for that fight.
He's going to hit him with one right hand, run into him with a flying knee, and then clinch knee him until he died.
Yeah.
So I'm glad we didn't see that. As for me, I believe, have a Canelo Alvarez versus Miguel Cotto breakdown coming out in Flow Boxing this week. And I will also be doing something for Klitschko Fury because it's such a fantastic fight over there on Bad Left Hook. As for MMA, we're kind of waiting until the big weekend in 2 weeks. With oh my God, with McGregor Aldo, with Weidman Rockhold, with Edgar Mendez, with so many good fights lined up for just a 3-day bonanza of UFC action. So we're going to be having 2 fantastic shows for you guys in the coming 2 weeks, focusing on all the great fights coming up that weekend. And I believe that is December
10th, December 11th, and December 12th is the 3-day extravaganza, beginning with Van Zant Namajunas on Thursday night. That goes straight into Edgar Mendez on Friday, and then Aldo McGregor on Saturday.
Yeah, so 2 weeks to cover that. We're going to need 2 episodes to cover all those fantastic fights ahead of time, and then hopefully we'll have lots of great action to discuss after the fact, and we're just waiting with bated breath. Until then, thank you guys for joining us for today's episode. We hope you enjoyed it as much as we did, and we will see you next week to cover some of that fantastic upcoming fight action, and either to gloat or apologize for me picking Tyson Fury over Vladimir Klitschko. With nothing else to add, thank you guys. If you came here today for the finer points of face punching, you came to the right place. This has been Heavy Hands.